three trucks. Same paint job, same trailer length, same dent above the same headlight, parked nose to tail across both lanes of I-40, like someone had measured the gap between them with a ruler. No drivers standing outside, no hazards, just three dark cabs and a wall of steel I had about 4 seconds to decide whether I could stop for. I didn't have 4 seconds. I had maybe 2. My trailer locked up behind me, and for one long second, I genuinely believed I was about to become part of whatever this was instead of just a witness to it. Let me start from the beginning, because none of this should have happened the way it did. Quick thing before we go further. If you drive for a living, work nights, or just like stories from people who spend their lives alone in places most of us avoid, subscribe. This channel exists for exactly that. Tonight, we've got 3 stories, and this is the mildest one. Stay for the third. Story 1. The 3 trucks on I-40. My name's not important. What matters is I've hauled freight for almost 9 years, mostly the Texas to Tennessee corridor. And in that time, I've learned to stop being afraid of empty highways. Empty is normal. Empty is safe. It's the nights when something breaks the pattern that you remember. This was late September, hauling a refrigerated load out of Amarillo, headed toward Nashville on I-40. I'd timed it to drive straight through the night so I could deliver by mid-morning. Nothing unusual. I'd done that run a dozen times. Around 1 a.m., somewhere past the Oklahoma line, I noticed a set of headlights coming up fast behind me, then a second set, then a third. 3 trucks running close together, the kind of tight formation you'd expect from a fleet convoy moving equipment between job sites. They passed me one at a time, each one close enough behind the last that I could have sworn they were tethered. As the third one pulled past, I caught the trailer in my headlights. Same scuffed paint job as the one in front of it, same dent above the driver's side headlight. I told myself it was just the same company running matched trailers. That happens. What I couldn't explain was the radio. My CB had been dead air all night, not even static, just silence, which itself was strange on a route that usually had at least one trucker chattering about way stations. The second those 3 trucks passed me, the silence changed. Not voices, just a low hum, steady like a tone instead of a signal, that lasted exactly as long as it took them to pull ahead and disappear over the next rise. About 40 minutes later, I came up on all 3 of them again, pulled off onto the shoulder, single file, perfectly spaced, no hazards on, just sitting there with their cabin lights dark in the middle of nowhere. I slowed down out of habit. You always check on a fellow driver pulled over at night, that's just the code. And as I rolled past at a crawl, I looked into each cab. Empty. All 3. Engines running, lights off, doors shut, and not a single person in or around any of them. I didn't stop. I'm not ashamed to say that. Something about 3 running, unattended trucks lined up like that made the hair on my arm stand up in a way flat tires and breakdowns never had. I sped back up and kept my eyes on the road, and that's when I made the mistake of checking my mirror one more time. One of the 3 trucks had pulled back onto the highway, and it was closing the distance between us fast. I pushed my truck harder than I should have on a loaded trailer, watching my speed climb past where I was comfortable, and it didn't matter. Whatever was behind me matched it without effort, sitting close enough that its headlights washed out my whole cab in white light. I grabbed my CB more out of instinct than hope, given the dead air all night. Anybody on this channel? I've got a truck running me down on I-40 eastbound. Mile marker's got to be around 190. Anybody copy? For a long moment, nothing. Then a voice, distant and thin, like it was coming through on a frequency it didn't belong on. Get off at the next exit. Don't look at it. Just get off. Get off where? There's nothing out here. The voice didn't answer that. It just repeated itself, flatter this time. Don't look at it. I didn't get the chance to decide whether to listen. Up ahead, the other 2 trucks were already in position, parked diagonally across both lanes, close enough that there was no gap to thread through, no shoulder wide enough to skirt around them. I hit the brakes, my trailer swung wide behind me, tires screaming against the pavement, and I came to a stop somewhere around 15 feet from impact, boxed in front and back by 3 trucks that less than an hour ago had nobody driving them. That's the moment from the start of this video. The truck behind me killed its lights. The night went pitch black. No moon, no street lights, nothing but my own dash glow. I fumbled my phone out of my pocket and dialed 911 with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. And right as the call connected, the 2 trucks blocking me pulled forward, not toward me, but off to the right, down what I would have sworn was solid shoulder and guardrail a minute ago. There was a gap there, a road maybe, or just open ground. I couldn't tell in the dark. They rolled into it single file, and the truck behind me followed, taillights shrinking into nothing. By the time the dispatcher patched me through to a trooper and one finally arrived, there was no convoy, no side road, no tire tracks leaving the highway. Just guardrail, unbroken the way it's supposed to be. He looked at my trailer's skid marks, looked at me, and asked how many hours I'd been awake. I'd been awake plenty. I know what fatigue feels like, and it doesn't feel like 3 trucks with no drivers boxing you in on an empty interstate. I still run that stretch of I-40 every few weeks. I still check my mirrors more than I used to. And every time I pass mile marker 190, I find myself hoping the CB stays dead, because dead air on that road has started to feel like a safer option. If you ask enough truckers, you'll find almost every long route has at least one stretch nobody likes talking about. Sometimes it's just superstition passed driver to driver at a truck stop counter. Sometimes, like with the next story, somebody finds out why the warning existed in the first place. Story 2, mile marker 189. I'd only been driving solo for about 8 months when this happened, which matters because 8 months in, you still think every old-timer's warning is just hazing. You think you know better. I did, anyway, until that night. I was hauling a load of bottled water from Memphis up towards St. Louis, running a schedule that was tighter than it should have been because I'd taken a late pickup and didn't want to eat the delay. Around 9 p.m., I stopped for fuel at a truck stop outside Blytheville, and an older driver, gray beard, company patches from a fleet I didn't recognize, caught me filling up at the next pump and asked where I was headed. When I told him my route, he got quiet for a second, then said something I've thought about more times than I can count since. You're gonna pass through 188 to 194. Don't stop there. Doesn't matter what you see, doesn't matter what it looks like, you keep driving. I asked him why. He just shook his head, said, ask anybody who's run this road long enough. They'll tell you the same thing. Just don't stop. Then he capped his tank, climbed up into his cab, and pulled out before I could ask anything else. I'll be honest, I laughed it off. 6 miles of interstate, mile markers 188 to 194. Every long-haul route has a stretch some old guy's spooked about. I had a schedule to keep, and I wasn't about to add detour time chasing a ghost story. I hit mile marker 188 a little after 11 that night. The first thing I noticed was the radio. Not static, just nothing. A complete dead channel where there'd been at least some chatter the whole drive up. The second thing I noticed was the cold. My cab heater was running fine, but I swear the temperature in there dropped enough that I could see my breath fog up near the windshield, which doesn't make sense for a sealed cab in September. Around 189, I passed a car pulled half onto the shoulder, hazards going, hood up like it had broken down. Normal enough, except there was a man standing next to it, not waving, not looking at his engine, just standing there facing the highway, watching me pass. I didn't slow down. Something about how still he was kept my foot on the gas. A mile later, another vehicle, same setup, pulled over, hazards blinking, except this one had its driver's door hanging open and nobody anywhere near it. No one walking the shoulder, no headlamp bobbing through the dark like someone gone to relieve themselves. Just an open door and an empty road. I remember thinking very clearly that I needed to be done with this stretch of highway as fast as possible. And that's exactly when my engine started losing power. Not dying outright, sputtering first, like it was choking on something, the dash lights flickering in time with it. I pumped the gas, downshifted, did everything you're trained to do, and none of it mattered. By the time I coasted to a stop, I checked my GPS out of habit and saw exactly where I'd stopped. Mile marker 191. Dead center of the stretch I'd been warned about. No signal on my phone, nothing on the CB but that same flat silence. I sat there trying to convince myself this was just bad luck, bad fuel, bad timing, nothing more. And then I saw movement in my mirror. A figure walking up the shoulder toward my trailer, not running, not waving for help, just walking, slow and steady, the kind of pace that told me whoever it was had nowhere else to be and all the time in the world to get to me. I turned the key again, nothing. Turned it again, the engine cranked, sputtered, died. The figure was maybe 200 feet back now, still closing that same unhurried distance, and something about the way it moved, too smooth, like its steps weren't quite matching the rhythm of an actual walk, made every instinct in me scream that this wasn't somebody who needed roadside assistance. Third try, the engine caught, rough and complaining, but it caught. I didn't wait to see how close the figure had gotten. I put it in gear and got moving, watching my mirror the entire time, half expecting it to see it break into a run now that I was pulling away. It didn't run, it just stopped walking, stood there in the middle of the lane, and watched me go until the dark swallowed it whole. I didn't slow down again until I hit a gas station almost 30 miles up the road. The clerk took one look at me, and I must have looked exactly as wrecked as I felt, and asked if I had car trouble. When I told him roughly where, he just nodded slowly and said people don't usually make it through that stretch without some kind of story. He didn't elaborate, and honestly, I didn't push him to. I've taken the long way around that stretch every single time since, even when it costs me an extra 40 minutes. I don't know what that thing was walking up my shoulder that night, or what would have happened if my engine hadn't caught on the third try. I've decided I don't want to know. Some warnings, I've learned, you only need to ignore once. Both of those stories happened on the road, somewhere out in the dark, far from home. This last one is different. This one followed a guy all the way back to his front door, and out of everything I've heard from drivers over the years, this one is the one that still gets to me the most. Story 3. The hitchhiker who already knew my name. I want to say up front, I don't pick up hitchhikers. 11 years driving, I've passed hundreds of them standing on shoulders and overpasses, and the answer's always been no. Company policy aside, it's just not worth the risk. So when I tell you I broke my own rule that night, you should understand that something about the situation didn't feel like a normal hitchhiker at all. It felt like an exception. I was wrong about that. It was a Tuesday in early spring, hauling an empty trailer back from a delivery outside Knoxville, heading home to my place in Asheville, a run I've done more times than I can count. Late at night, mostly empty roads. About 40 minutes from home, I saw a man standing on the shoulder near an exit ramp. No car in sight, just him and a duffel bag, thumb out. No gas station nearby, nothing for miles in either direction. I don't know what made me slow down. Maybe it was how close to home I was. Maybe I just felt like there was nowhere out here for a stranded guy to have come from. I pulled over. He climbed up into the cab, dropped his bag at his feet, And before I'd even said a word, before I'd told him my name, my handle, anything, he said, "Thanks for stopping, Big Sky." That's my CB handle. Nobody outside the trucking world calls me that. I hadn't said it. I hadn't introduced myself at all. I asked how he knew that, and he just smiled, said something like "word travels," and let it go. I told myself maybe he'd heard me on the radio earlier that night, talking to another driver. It was thin, but it was something to hold on to. So I held on to it. We got to talking. He asked normal things at first, where I was headed, how long I'd been driving. But it didn't take long before the questions got specific in a way that started to bother me. He asked about my route schedule for the upcoming week, which I hadn't even finalized with dispatch yet. He asked how Carol was doing, my wife's name, which I never mentioned to him, like he already knew her, like he was just making conversation about someone he'd met before. I asked him, as steady as I could manage, how he knew my wife's name. He looked over at me, calm, almost amused, and said, "I know a lot about you. You've had a long week." That's when I decided I needed this ride to end early. I told him I had a stop coming up, that I could drop him near a gas station up ahead, figuring I'd get him out before we got anywhere close to my actual address. He didn't argue with it. He just said, "Easy as anything. Actually, just take me to your place. I'll wait for you there." I told him that wasn't happening, that I didn't even know his name, let alone why he'd assume I was driving him home. He turned in his seat to look at me directly for the first time since he'd gotten in and said, "You're going there anyway. It's not out of your way." I want to be clear that nothing about how he said it was aggressive. That was almost the worst part. There was no threat in his voice, no edge, just total certainty. Like we were discussing something that had already been decided, and he was simply waiting for me to catch up. I told him I was pulling over and he needed to get out. He didn't fight me on it. He just reached for his bag, unhurried. And as he opened the door, he looked back at me and said, "I'll see you at the house." Then he stepped down out of the cab into a stretch of empty roadside with nothing around for miles. No buildings, no lights, no reason for anyone to be standing there. And by the time I'd pulled back onto the road and checked my mirror, he was already gone. Not walking away, just gone, like he'd never been standing there at all. I drove the rest of the way home faster than I should have, replaying everything he'd said, trying to come up with some explanation that made sense, and not finding one. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my hands were still shaking on the wheel. The porch light was on. The house looked completely normal. I sat in the cab for a minute just watching it, half convinced I was about to find something wrong the second I walked inside. I wasn't ready for what was actually waiting for me. Carol opened the door before I even got to it, smiling, completely at ease, and said, "Oh good, you're back. Your friend stopped by earlier, said he'd just wait for you whenever you got in." I asked her what friend. She described him. Same build, same duffel bag, same calm, easy way of talking, like it was the most unremarkable thing in the world. Like he'd been there for an hour, sitting on our porch talking with her, and left only because he assumed I'd be home soon. I don't have a friend that matches that description. I never have. I checked the house that night, every room, every closet, told Carol some excuse about making sure we'd locked up properly. I didn't find anything. I haven't picked up a hitchhiker since, and some nights, when I get home late and the porch light is already on, I find myself standing in the driveway a little longer than I used to. Not sure if I'm about to walk into an empty house, or if he ever really left at all. 3 stories, 3 different kinds of dread. And if I'm honest, that last one is the reason I still think twice before pulling over for anyone on the shoulder. Let me know in the comments which story got to you the most. If you haven't already, subscribe. This channel is building out a full series on the horror stories of people who work the loneliest jobs out there, and trucking is far from the last one we're covering. Stay safe out there, and maybe don't take that shortcut tonight.